They say that in Paisley, the rain doesn't just fall, it settles into the stone, soaking into the history of a town that has seen the best of Scottish industry and the absolute worst of human nature. But there is a different kind of saturation occurring in the modern era. It is a digital saturation, a flood of data and vitriol that moves faster than the black water of the river cart. In the center of this storm stands a name that triggers a visceral reaction in the gut of every Scot who remembers the mid-2000s. Tobin. It is a name synonymous with the ultimate darkness. Peter Tobin was a man who turned the rolling hills and quiet suburbs of the United Kingdom into a hunting ground, a predator whose cruelty was so absolute that his name became a shorthand for the monster under the bed. But bloodlines do not simply stop when a heart ceases to beat in a prison infirmary. Malice is a remarkably resilient inheritance. It travels through the DNA, but in the 21st century, it has found a new medium for transmission. It has moved from the physical shadows of the backstreets into the glowing screens of our pockets. Meet Jade Jackson. To the people of Paisley, she is a niece of a serial killer, a woman born into a shadow she can never truly outrun. But to the judicial system, she is a case study in the failure of modern rehabilitation. And to a 12-year-old girl in the autumn of 2015, she was something far more terrifying. She was a phantom. She was a digital ghost who turned the promise of social media into a relentless engine of psychological warfare. This is not a story about schoolyard bullying or a simple online spat. This is a clinical examination of a predator who utilized the anonymity of the web to wage a campaign of terror that would make her uncle's cold-blooded nature feel hauntingly familiar. This is the story of how Jade Jackson weaponized the internet, exploited the weaknesses of the British legal system, and eventually transitioned into the volatile, unregulated world of TikTok, where the shadow of Paisley continues to grow. The year 2015 was a pivot point in the way we interact with the digital world. The smartphone had become an appendage, a permanent link to our social standing and our sense of self. For a 12-year-old girl, that phone is her entire world. It is her connection to her peers, her sanctuary, and her gateway to the future. But in late 2015, that sanctuary was invaded. Jade Jackson was 20 years old at the time. She was an adult by every legal definition, a woman with a fully formed understanding of the weight of her words. Yet, she chose to spend 4 months of her life constructing a digital skin called Jade Brown. This was a fake Facebook profile, a mask designed to allow her to hunt without consequence. The motive was as pathetic as the execution was brutal. Jackson had convinced herself that this 12-year-old child was talking to her boyfriend. It was a delusional, territorial fixation that triggered a predatory response. For 120 days, Jackson did not just message the girl, she besieged her. Think about the geometry of that fear. Imagine being 12 years old and waking up every single morning to a screen filled with bile. Every vibration of the phone in a pocket, every notification chime in the middle of the night, was a targeted strike against a child's sanity. Jackson did not use the typical insults of a disgruntled teenager. Her language was clinical, visceral, and fixated on the physical destruction of the human body. The transcripts recovered by the police are a descent into sociopathic obsession. Jackson explicitly told the girl that it would be cool when she had blood pouring from her. She didn't say she wanted to fight her, she said she wanted to see her leak. She was fetishizing the trauma of a minor, projecting a violent, gore-filled fantasy onto a child who hadn't even reached high school. When words failed to elicit the level of terror she desired, Jackson turned to imagery. She utilized Snapchat, the predator's preferred tool for disappearing evidence, to send a photo that would remain etched in the victim's mind long after the data had been deleted from the servers. The image featured Jackson herself, holding a kitchen knife against her own face. The message was implicit and terrifying. If I am willing to do this to myself, imagine what I am capable of doing to you. It was a projection of absolute instability, a declaration that the person on the other end of the screen was not bound by the normal constraints of human empathy or self-preservation. It was a tactic designed to paralyze, to ensure that the victim felt there was nowhere to hide and no one who could stop the coming violence. The victim's family, desperate to protect their child from this digital onslaught, tried to use the ultimate deterrent. The girl messaged Jackson and told her that her father was a police officer. In the mind of a normal 20-year-old, the mention of the law usually triggers a retreat, a moment of clarity where the potential for jail time outweighs the desire for harassment. But Jackson was not a normal 20-year-old. She was a Tobin. Her response was a masterclass in sociopathic defiance, a verbal middle finger to the very concept of authority. She messaged back, "What's he gonna do? He will get smashed TAE." In that single sentence, Jackson declared war not just on a child, but on the badge, the law, and the social contract itself. She was untouchable in her own mind, a predator who viewed the police as just another obstacle to be smashed. When the law finally caught up with her in 2016, the Scottish justice system faced a choice. They were looking at a 20-year-old woman with a notorious surname who had spent 4 months terrorizing a child with threats of blood and blade. But the system, in its infinite desire for rehabilitation, chose the path of least resistance. They handed Jackson a community payback order. They gave her social worker supervision. And they imposed a 2-year ban from the internet, a web ban. It was a sentence that existed only on paper. In a world where Wi-Fi is a utility as common as water, a web ban is virtually unenforceable without constant, intrusive monitoring. For Jade Jackson, the ban was not a punishment. It was a suggestion she chose to ignore from the moment she walked out of the courtroom. For the better part of 2016, Jackson mocked the court's leniency. She treated her social workers with the same contempt she had shown the police. She didn't show up for appointments. She didn't comply with the terms of her supervision. Most importantly, she never left the internet. She remained the shadow in the corner of the room, the digital predator who refused to be caged by a piece of paper. But the system has its limits. By November 2016, the total failure of her community payback order could no longer be ignored. The revolving door finally stuck. Jackson was caged for 8 months for the breach. For the first time, the woman who had threatened to smash the police and bleed a child was forced to sit in a cell and contemplate the fact that she was not, in fact, untouchable. But 8 months in the Scottish prison system is not a long time. It is a cooling-off period, not a cure. It is a pause button on a life defined by conflict. While she sat in her cell, the 12-year-old victim was left with the wreckage of her childhood. You do not just move on from a 4-month campaign of death threats and knife imagery. That kind of trauma alters the brain's chemistry. It creates a permanent state of hypervigilance, a world where every phone notification sounds like a threat and every stranger in the street looks like a potential assailant. And while the victim was trying to find a new normal, Jade Jackson was simply waiting for her release. She didn't wait long to return to her old habits. In July 2017, less than a year after she was jailed for the initial breach, Jackson was back in the dock. This time, the scope of her malice had expanded. She wasn't just focusing on one child, she was waging a multi-front war. Over the course of 6 months, Jackson utilized Facebook Messenger to conduct a relentless campaign of online hatred against 5 separate individuals. She had moved from a sniper to a machine gunner, spraying vitriol and threats across the digital landscape of Paisley. The details of the 2017 case mirrored the 2015 campaign. The same lack of empathy, the same obsessive persistence, and the same absolute disregard for the impact of her words. Sheriff Tom McCartney, presiding over the case, was forced to confront a woman who had clearly learned nothing from her time behind bars. He described her actions as a protracted campaign of hatred. He sentenced her to 160 days in prison. But again, the math of the justice system felt hollow. If you divide 160 days by 5 victims, you get 32 days per person. In the eyes of the law, the trauma of a 6-month stalking campaign was worth about a month of a predator's time. It was a sentence that failed to account for the cumulative damage Jackson was causing to the social fabric of her community. It was a legal band-aid on a psychological hemorrhage. As the years passed, the platforms changed. Facebook became the domain of the older generation, and the younger, more volatile elements of society migrated elsewhere. Jade Jackson migrated with them. We now enter the modern era, the age of TikTok. But this isn't the TikTok of dance trends and cooking tutorials. This is the toxic, unregulated underbelly of the app, a place where the drama scene in Scotland has become a digital coliseum. Here, people go live to argue, to expose each other, and to monetize their own volatility. It is a world where conflict is currency, and for someone like Jade Jackson, it is the perfect habitat. If you go to subreddits like r/UK TikTok behaving badly, you will find a modern archive of Jackson's behavior. She is no longer hiding behind the mask of Jade Brown. She is center stage, her face illuminated by the ring light of a live stream, broadcasting her chaos to thousands of viewers in real time. The allegations discussed by the community are heavy and harrowing. They speak of domestic violence, of abuse claims caught on camera, and of a woman who seems to exist in a permanent state of high-octane aggression. On TikTok, Jackson has found a way to bypass the traditional barriers of the law. She isn't just messaging individuals anymore, she is performing for an audience that feeds the beast with likes, comments, and gifts that translate into actual revenue. The shift from the private harassment of 2015 to the public volatility of 2026 is a terrifying evolution. In 2015, she was a predator in the shadows. Today, she is a protagonist in a digital freak show. She utilizes the live feature to engage in screaming matches that last for hours, dragging her private life and the lives of those around her into the gutter for the sake of engagement. The domestic abuse allegations that have surfaced in these digital circles point to a disturbing trend. The violence that was once just words on a screen appears to have manifested in the physical world. The psychological terror she once inflicted on a 12-year-old has expanded into a lifestyle of volatile relationships and public meltdowns. The failure of the digital platforms to police this behavior is a central theme in the Shadow of Paisley. Despite her criminal record, despite her history of using social media to terrorize children and adults alike, TikTok provides her with a global microphone. Every time she goes live, the platform's algorithm pushes her conflict to more viewers, because conflict generates watch time, and watch time generates profit. The platforms have become the enablers of the bloodline, providing the bandwidth for the Tobin legacy to continue its work in the 21st century. They have gamified harassment and turned psychological instability into a spectator sport. We have to look at the psychological profile of a woman who can do these things. We have to ask if the shadow of Peter Tobin is a matter of nature or nurture. In the field of psychology, they speak of the dark tetrad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. When Jade Jackson told a child it would be cool to see her blood pouring, she was checking every single box. She displayed a total lack of empathy, a sadistic desire to witness suffering, and a narcissistic belief that she was above the law. This isn't just a troubled girl from a rough town. This is a person who possesses the same cold, predatory hardware as the uncle who buried bodies in his garden. The only difference is the choice of weapon. Peter Tobin used a blade, Jade Jackson uses a screen. The justice system's failure to recognize this is perhaps the most frustrating part of the story. By treating her as a young offender who simply needed supervision, the courts allowed her to hone her skills and expand her reach. They didn't see that they weren't dealing with a rebellious youth, but with a burgeoning predator who viewed their leniency as a sign of weakness. Every time she was given a community payback order or a short sentence, she was being taught that the price of terrorizing others was a price she could easily afford to pay. The system was playing checkers while Jackson was playing a much darker game. The impact of this failure extends far beyond Jade Jackson herself. It sends a message to every victim of cyberstalking and online harassment. It tells them that their safety is a secondary concern to the rights of the predator to have a digital presence. It tells the 12-year-old girl from 2015 that her trauma was only worth an 8-month sentence for a breach, not for the original crime of destroying her sense of safety. It tells the 5 victims from 2017 that their peace of mind is worth about a month of jail time. And it tells the users of TikTok today that the platforms will always prioritize the engagement of a volatile creator over the protection of the community. The Shadow of Paisley is long, and it is cold. It is a shadow cast by a history of violence and a modern reality of digital predation. Peter Tobin is dead, but the impulses that drove him are alive and well in the palm of your hand. They are streaming in 1080p. They are appearing in your notifications. They are lurking in the comments of a subreddit dedicated to watching people behave badly. Jade Jackson is a reminder that the monsters of the past haven't disappeared. They have just upgraded their hardware. They no longer need to find you in a dark alleyway. They can find you in your bedroom, on your couch, and in your school. As we look at the legacy of the Tobin bloodline, we must realize that the Shadow of Paisley is not just a geographical location. It is a state of being. It is the persistent, lingering threat of a person who has no empathy and no boundaries. It is the realization that the law is often 3 steps behind the technology, and the technology is often indifferent to the human cost of its existence. Jade Jackson continues to stream. She continues to engage in the toxic cycles of TikTok drama, and the victims of her past continue to live with the echoes of her threats. The blood is still pouring, metaphorically, through the fiber optic cables of a world that doesn't know how to turn the screen off. The story of Blood and Bandwidth is a warning. It is a warning about the inheritance of malice and the failure of our institutions to protect the most vulnerable from the most persistent. It is a reminder that when we talk about cyberbullying, we are often talking about a digital form of a much older, much darker impulse. The shadow hasn't moved, it has just expanded to cover the entire grid. And as long as the platforms provide the bandwidth, the bloodline will find a way to keep the shadow alive. In Paisley, the rain continues to fall, and in the digital world, the predator continues to watch, wait, and go live. The campaign never truly ends. It just changes apps. The Shadow of Paisley is permanent, a dark mark on the history of Scotland and a digital scar on the future of everyone who has ever had the misfortune of crossing paths with the niece of Peter Tobin.